Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Alan Hathaway. I'm glad you joined me for this Sunday before Labor Day. I I like to focus in a little bit on the concept of labor and how important it is. One of the things that Scripture tells us is that labor or work is central to our human existence. From the very beginning in the book of Genesis, we are told that humanity was expected to work in the garden and produce and be productive in their lives. And we realize how important this is. Anything that is built in our country, the things that have lasted for thousands of years of human endeavor have been the work of people's hands. And they are surprising things. They are buildings, they are things, and the people that built them are unknown to us in most cases. We have no clue who the workmen were, but their skill and their labor shines down through history. And they have produced something that has lasting value. That's why work is one of the most important things that we do. And surprisingly, skilled labor is extremely important. It's a very valuable asset in our society. And sometimes we devalue that in favor of things that are not so valuable in our society. I was caught by surprise quite a few years ago when I was doing some research for a sermon series I was working on. I was doing some research into what were the occupations that could garner $1 million if you followed those occupations and did well at them. And I was surprised that almost none of them required a college degree. They required skill, but they did not require any type of a college degree. They simply required a great deal of know-how and dedication. From that point, I have taken a totally different view. Prior to that point, I was pretty high on education as being the direction that a person needed to go if they were going to really change the world. But I have since moved away from that. I have become very strongly an advocate of the idea of skilled trades and for encouraging people to go into skilled trades, because I think they are desperately needed. What fascinated me as I started doing some research into Christian history is the fact that most of the early Christians were people of the skilled trades. They were people who could work with their hands and make things. It surprised me because very often we're told that they were the dregs of society, but most of them were hardworking people who worked day in and day out at their businesses and accomplished things. We see quite a few of them in the New Testament. We see them working with their hands. The Apostle Paul himself was a laborer and worked with his hands. And so we need to value that. Paul would say in his letters that a person should work with their hands. He told the Thessilonians, you should live a quiet life and work with your hands so as to give a good testimony of Jesus Christ in the culture you live in. That is something that has been lost a lot in Christianity, and we need to regain that. We need to gain a new respect and new honor for the trades, for the idea of skilled labor. The Labor Day is an interesting day in itself. It began in 1894 as a result of a very difficult period in American history. Most of us, when we hear about the Great Depression, think about the 1930s. 1929 through the most of the 1930s was a time of severe difficulty financially in our country. But had you talked to people prior to that and had asked them about the Great Depression, they would have mentioned a much different time, and in many ways it was far, far worse than the Depression of the 1930s. In 1893, the stock market collapsed in May of that year. It led to, it was the result of two major manufacturers collapsing into bankruptcy and literally shutting their entire factories. They were major manufacturers in the United States. From that caused a cascade in the economy that literally wrecked the economy of the United States in the year 1893. That caused many companies to pull back from their orders. The railroad lines stopped their orders on coaches. Most of the coaches were being produced by a company in Chicago called Pullman Company. Those coaches, or those rail cars, were important for the rail industry, but they didn't have a lot of money to spend, so they canceled orders. And as a result, the Pullman Company decided to reduce the wages of their laborers. What most people don't understand about that is that the Pullman Company provided something that was part of the progressive era, the idea that the company should take care of its employees. So they created towns of their own that were operated by the company themselves. They built all the housing in the towns and rented it to their workers. They provided shops where their workers could buy. They paid their workers in scrip that would be easily transferred to those shops and to those rental facilities, but were very hard to transfer into cash. And so their workers were very much trapped in those communities. What Pullman Company did not do, though, is it did not reduce the cost of rent in their towns, nor did it reduce the cost of goods in their stores. And so as a result, the workmen were being crushed between the reduction of their wages and the cost of the goods that those wages could buy. And it led to a strike in May of 1894 called the Pullman Strike. It was a major catastrophe for the United States, coming on the heels of the financial collapse of 1893. It devastated the United States. Transportation almost came to a halt as the railroad unions joined hands with the Pullman strikers and literally struck across the entire United States, crippling railroad lines throughout the United States. Transportation ended, and everything was brought to a screeching halt. Food was not being sent to stores. The economy came to the very brink of complete and total collapse. It was a terrifying time. The strikers, however, were sympathetic. Most newspapers in the United States were heavily supportive of the strikers, and many people felt tremendous sympathy for them in this circumstance. President Grover Cleveland, who was the first Democrat elected to the presidency since the Civil War, was caught in a very difficult thing. His party had been moving toward progressivism, and it was very difficult for them, and yet the entire nation was caught up in this strike situation, and there was a lot of pressure from businesses and banks and other institutions to end the strike. And so in July of 1894, President Grover Cleveland called out the federal forces to break the strike. Instead of breaking the strike, by July the 7th, it had cascaded into a major conflict. All across the country, rail yards were being broken into and vandalized. Rail cars were being burned on the tracks. They were being looted, and railroad police were at their wits' end. There had been killings already throughout this entire strike, and then the military became involved, and the governor of Illinois called out the Illinois Guard. On July the 7th, they began firing on the strikers. Many of them were killed. It was a serious moment in American history. The strike would end on July the 20th, but in its wake, it left a torn and shredded country. There was deep animosity, and much of it directed toward the Democratic Party and its head, Grover Cleveland. In fact, they would not win the next election, and for 30 years, there would not be a Democratic majority in any House of Congress on the federal level, nor would there be any Democratic person elected to President of the United States until Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was that serious of a situation for the Democratic Party coming out of this. Labor Day was a response by President Grover Cleveland to try and mollify the damage that had been done. He pushed through in August, the end of July and the early part of August, the Labor Day proclamation. And Congress agreed to it, and they put it on the calendar. And that's where our modern Labor Day comes from. It is an attempt to try and mollify labor and people who are in the trades because of the difficulties that were a reality for the working people of that particular time. It didn't end the Depression. By 1895, the unemployment rate in the United States is estimated to have been around 20%. That means 1 in every 5 workers were out of work. That was a unbelievably difficult circumstance, and it would not end until 1898. Our nation went through a very difficult period of time, and it molded and shaped the political landscape of our country. In understanding that, we need to understand how important labor is. There's always a temptation to steal from other people, from laborers. And there is no question that what was happening by the Pullman Company was a kind of theft. But there was also theft on the other side as these strikers broke into other people's property and stole it. So there was bad on both sides of this. And one of the things we try and do is justify ourselves in this process. That's why the Apostle Paul talks to us quite pointedly about being honorable in our labor and in our work, to work hard and to work with a sense of conscientiousness and responsibility. We lose that when we lose our work ethic, the idea that we are responsible and should be responsible before Christ, not before the rest of the world. Our responsibility as Christians for our work is before Christ first. And so while we do understand the importance of rest, and those are important things, there is also an importance to work, because in our work we honor Christ. The Sabbath was given to humanity as a reminder of how important work was and how much that process honored God. Jesus tells us that the Sabbath was created for humanity. I hope tomorrow, as you are celebrating Labor Day, that you will rest, enjoy yourself, have a wonderful day, and appreciate the God-given privilege of working with your hands and making something that lasts. God bless you. You have a wonderful day. Have a tremendous Labor Day. Enjoy yourself. God's blessings.